My son, Martin, left behind a $40 million legacy. I thought his death was a tragedy. I was wrong. It was the first step in his wife's plan, and I was supposed to be the second. This story is about how a web of lies can be unraveled by a single, chilling discovery. If you believe truth must always come to light, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on It. Sleep hadn't been a friend for months, and on the morning of my son's will reading, it abandoned me completely before the sun even considered rising. I found myself in the kitchen at 4 a.m., going through the motions of brewing coffee, a ritual that had lost its purpose. Martin had been the coffee enthusiast, the one who would grind the beans fresh every morning. The rich, nutty aroma, a cornerstone of our daily lives, whenever he visited. Now, the silence in the house was a physical weight, a thick blanket that smothered every sound. It was a hostile presence, punctuated only by the low hum of the refrigerator and the mournful ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. I stood by the window, staring into the pre-dawn darkness of my Naperville neighborhood. This house, once a bustling hub of family gatherings and holiday cheer, now felt like a hollowed-out cavern. Every empty chair seemed to accuse me. Every silent room echoed with a phantom laugh. I caught my reflection in the dark glass, a tired man, aged a decade in 3 short months. His engineer's logic drowned in a sea of grief. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, to the photo that was both my comfort and my torment. It was from a company picnic 2 years ago. Martin stood beaming, arm slung around his wife, Helen, his other hand holding a half-eaten hot dog like a trophy. His eyes, the same brilliant blue as his mother's, crinkled at the corners with a genuine joy that felt like a relic from another lifetime. I remembered that day so clearly. He'd spent 20 minutes explaining the intricacies of a new encryption algorithm to me, his hands sketching invisible diagrams in the air. "I'm building shields, Dad," he'd said, his voice buzzing with that infectious, brilliant energy. "Digital shields for ordinary people, for hospitals, for schools. We're in a new kind of war, and the front line is invisible. We stop the bad guys before they can even get in." Helen had been standing beside him, a patient smile fixed on her face, though her eyes were distant, scanning the crowd. She'd patted his arm and said, "That's nice, honey," before drifting off to chat with the CEO's wife. At the time, I'd seen it as simple boredom with a topic she didn't understand. Now, the memory left a sour taste in my mouth. The coffee maker beeped. A shrill, unwelcome intrusion. I poured the dark liquid into a mug but didn't drink. It just felt necessary to perform the act of normalcy. Upstairs, my suit was waiting, the same somber navy wool I'd worn to his funeral. Putting it on again felt like reopening the wound. A formal surrender to the fact that his vibrant life was now reduced to a stack of legal documents, a will reading, the final, bureaucratic stamp on a life stolen far too soon. With a sigh that felt dredged up from the very foundation of the house, I finally moved. I rinsed the untouched coffee down the drain and went to the front door. The jangle of my car keys in the quiet hall was obscenely loud. A metallic, final sound. I pulled on my old leather jacket, its familiar weight a small comfort, and stepped out onto the porch. The chilly November air bit at my cheeks. My silver sedan sat waiting in the driveway, dew clinging to its windshield like a veil of tears. It was an engineer's car, unassuming, logical, efficient. I'd owned it for 7 years and knew its every quirk. I clicked the remote. The lights flashed a silent, familiar greeting. As I walked towards the driver's side, my mind was already a million miles away. Rehearsing the grim theater of the day, ahead the lawyer's stuffy office. The stilted condolences, Helen's performance as the grieving widow. Silas, for the love of God, don't start the car. The voice, thin and shredded with a terror I'd never heard before. Sliced through the morning calm. I whipped my head around. Arthur, my 70-year-old neighbor, was scrambling out of his front door, his bathrobe flapping behind him. He was running. A clumsy, frantic sprint across the wet lawn in his slippers. To his face, a mask of sheer panic. "Arthur, what is it? What's the matter?" I called out, my heart giving a sudden, hard lurch. He finally reached my driveway, stumbling to a halt and bracing himself against the side of my car. He was panting, his chest heaving. "Don't," he gasped, his eyes wide and wild. "Just listen to me. Don't get in." My mind, conditioned for logic, cycled through rational explanations. A swarm of bees in the engine, a stray cat, nothing fit the level of his terror. "Arthur, you need to breathe. Tell me what you saw." He took a few ragged gulps of air. "Last night," he said, his voice a shaky whisper. "Late, maybe 11:30. My beagle, Buster, started raising hell. So I went to the window to see what was out there. And I saw someone, right here, by your car." He pointed a trembling finger at the hood of my sedan. They were hunched over the engine, working on something. They had a dark hoodie pulled up, covering their face. But, from the build, the way they moved, I'm sure it was a woman. I think, Silas. I swear it looked like Helen. The name landed in the air between us like a grenade. Helen Arthur. That's impossible. She lives 30 miles from here. Why would she be? I don't know why he insisted, his voice cracking. But she was here for 15, maybe 20 minutes, just messing around under the hood. I couldn't see what she was doing. Then I flicked on the porch light to get a better look. And she must have seen me. She slammed the hood down a real hard bang and just took off. Ran down the street and disappeared into the dark before I could even process what I was seeing. A profound, bone-deep cold seeped into me, far colder than the November air. I looked from Arthur's terrified face to my loyal, unassuming car. In the space of a single heartbeat, it had become a monster. The engineer in me took over. My mind a flurry of cold, hard schematics, pushing back the wave of emotional shock. Brake lines are hydraulic, vulnerable. Steering linkage is mechanical, can be loosened. A fuel line can be nicked. 100 ways to turn a 2-ton machine into an unguided missile on a busy highway. 100 ways to stage a catastrophic, tragic accident. And then, the memory I'd been suppressing for 3 months broke through the surface with the force of a tidal wave. Martin's last text message, sent from his sterile hospital bed. At the time, my world was a blur of medical terms. IV drips, and exhausted. Holawe ad nurses. The phone had buzzed, and I'd glanced at it, my mind preoccupied. The words had seemed so strange. "Dad, if anything happens to me, be careful with Helen. Just be careful." I had brushed it off, attributing it to the potent cocktail of drugs they were pumping into him. Paranoia, delusion. The words I had dismissed as a symptom now screamed in my mind, written in blood. This wasn't a possibility anymore. It was a certainty. My own breath hitched in my chest. My hands began to shake. A fine. Uncontrollable tremor. I needed to know. Speculation was a poison. I needed facts. Data. Proof. I pulled out my phone, my thumb fumbling on the slick glass. I almost called 911, but stopped. What would I say? That my elderly neighbor thought he saw my grieving daughter-in-law near my car. It was a ghost story. Her lawyers would tear it. And me. To shreds. I needed something irrefutable. My finger scrolled down my contacts until it found the name, Frankie Costello, an artist who painted with motor oil and composed symphonies with a torque wrench. Martin had sworn by him. I pressed the call button. He answered on the second ring. His voice a familiar, gravelly rumble. Silas. Hey. I was so sorry to hear about the kid. A real tragedy. You need something. I need your help. Frankie. I said, forcing my voice into a low, steady tone that felt like a lie. It's an emergency. I need you to come to my house. Right now. And bring your full diagnostic kit. Everything. Say no more. He said. The understanding immediate in his voice. I'm on my way. Those 20 minutes waiting for Frankie were the longest of my life. When his tow truck finally rumbled into the driveway, it was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I explained Arthur's story, sticking only to the observable facts. My voice, the detached monotone of an engineer reporting an anomaly. Frankie listened, his weathered face growing more grim with every word. He didn't offer condolences or express disbelief. He just nodded, popped open a massive toolbox, and got to work. He ignored the hood, instead sliding a heavy-duty hydraulic jack under the car's frame. With a few powerful pumps, the sedan's front end rose into the air, exposing its complex underbelly. He slid underneath on a creeper, his flashlight beam cutting a sharp, surgical line in the shadows. I stood, watch. My arms clamped across my chest, a helpless observer at my own potential crime scene. The only sounds were the metallic scrape of Frankie's tools and my own heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. After what felt like a lifetime, he rolled back out. He sat up slowly, the grease on his hands seeming darker than usual. He didn't look at me at first. He just stared at the exposed brake line near the front wheel, his jaw set like granite. Silas, he said, his voice flat and hard. This wasn't wear and tear. This wasn't a leak. He finally turned his head, and his eyes were cold with a mechanic's fury. Your brake line was cut, clean through. Looks like a pair of high-leverage cutters. It's a pinhole slice. You'd have had pressure for a few miles. Enough to feel normal leaving your neighborhood. But every time you tapped the brake, you'd be pumping fluid out. By the time you merged onto the I-55, the pedal would go straight to the floor. No warning. Just gone. My knees felt weak. He saw the look on my face and held up a hand. He wasn't finished. And that's not the worst of it, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Whoever did this was thorough. They also loosened the castle nut on the outer tie rod end. Just enough. You wouldn't feel it at low speeds. But once you hit 60, maybe 65, that wheel would have started to shudder so violently you'd think the car was tearing itself apart. You'd lose all steering control. You wouldn't be driving anymore. Silas. He stood up, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better decades. He looked me straight in the eye and delivered the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. You'd be a passenger in a metal coffin, aimed straight for the median. This wasn't just sabotage. This was a perfectly designed, flawlessly executed trap, meant to look like nothing more than a catastrophic, tragic accident. The world narrowed to the confines of my garage, the air thick with the smell of gasoline, cold concrete, and a betrayal so profound it felt like a physical entity in the space with us. Frankie's words hung there, shimmering with horror, a perfectly designed trap. For a long moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My engineer's mind, which had been a shield, now became a torture device, vividly rendering the physics of my own death. I could almost feel the phantom shudder of the wheel, the sickening lurch as the car lost its obedience to my hands. The final, explosive impact. It was a death planned with the cold, impersonal precision of a blueprint. Frankie put a heavy, grease-stained hand on my shoulder. "Silas, you need to call the cops. Right now. We don't touch another thing. This is a crime scene." His voice was a lifeline pulling me back from the abyss. I took a ragged breath, the first in what felt like an eternity. The instinct to agree with him, to hand this nightmare over to the authorities, was overwhelming. But as the initial shock receded, it was replaced by something else. An ice-cold clarity, a rage so pure and focused it burned away the fear. I finally looked at him, and he must have seen the shift in my eyes. "No," I said, my voice raspy, unfamiliar even to myself. "Not yet." "What do you mean?" "Not yet," he demanded, his face a mask of disbelief. "She tried to kill you." "Man, and she'll deny it." I shot back, the logic clicking into place with grim certainty. "She'll cry. She'll play the part of the devoted, grieving widow, shocked and horrified by the accusation. She'll say, Arthur is a confused old man. She'll say, I'm lashing out, driven mad by grief. It becomes a messy, complicated case of, he said, she said. No, I can't give her that stage to perform on. He won't." The kitchen, which had felt like a tomb just an hour earlier, now became a war room. I paced the linoleum floor while Frankie sat at the small table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee he'd made but hadn't touched. As I moved, memories of Helen began to surface, no longer random or innocent, but pieces of a puzzle I had been too blind to see. I remembered standing in Martin's sterile hospital room a week before he passed. He'd been having a good day, a rare day of clarity. He wanted to speak to his lead programmer about a new security patch. Helen had intercepted the call, her voice dripping with synthetic sweetness. "Oh, sweetie, he's just too exhausted to talk shop right now. The doctors said he needs complete rest." She'd smiled at me, a perfect portrait of wifely concern, while Martin just sighed and sank back into his pillows. The brief spark in his eyes extinguished. It wasn't concern. I saw it now. It was control. She was isolating him, cutting the lines of communication to the world he had built, the world he loved. Another memory. This one from a family dinner. Martin was passionately explaining a new charitable initiative. His company was funding a program to teach coding to underprivileged kids. He was alive with purpose. Helen had waited for him to finish, then tapped her wine glass with a perfectly manicured nail. "That's wonderful. Honey, does this mean the company gets a bigger tax write-off?" She had a unique talent for taking anything beautiful and stamping a price tag on it. She hadn't seen his passion. She'd seen a line item on a balance sheet. She had been systematically reducing my son's magnificent life into a single, ugly number, his net worth. Driven by a desperate, fading hope that I was wrong, that I was the one going mad, I stepped into the living room and called my sister. Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. Her voice flustered. Silas, I was just about to leave for the reading. Are you okay? You sound strange. I took a breath. Sarah, something has happened. I need you to listen to me. Really listen. I think Helen is dangerous. I think she tried to hurt me. I laid out the story in a low, urgent voice. Arthur's warning. The cut-break line. The loosened tie rod. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. But it wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of disbelief. Oh, Silas, she finally said, and her voice was filled with a pity that felt like a slap in the face. Honey, you've been under so much stress? Grief does terrible things to the mind. Are you sure you're not overthinking things? Helen has been a rock through all of this. She planned the entire funeral. She's devastated. This has nothing to do with grief, I said, my voice rising. A mechanic confirmed it. The car was sabotaged. Maybe it was a botched robbery, or some kid she offered. Her tone, that of an adult placating a hysterical child. To accuse Helen, it's just not rational. Please, just get a taxi and come to the lawyer's office. We can talk after. You're not thinking clearly right now. I closed my eyes. My own sister, she heard sabotage and murder attempt, and her first instinct was to question my sanity. Not Helen's character. The feeling of utter isolation was profound. A cold, hard weight in the pit of my stomach. I was completely, terrifyingly alone in this fight. You're right, I said, my voice suddenly devoid of all emotion. I'll see you there. I hung up before she could offer any more well-meaning, soul-crushing reassurances. I walked back into the living room and stood before Martin's photograph on the mantelpiece. I looked into his smiling, vibrant eyes. My grief, which had been a fog of helpless sorrow, was now crystallizing into something hard and sharp. It was a diamond forged under immense pressure. I'm sorry, son. I whispered to the picture. I'm so sorry I didn't see it. I didn't listen. The guilt was a physical pain in my chest. But I see it now, and I promise you, she will not get away with this. She will not tarnish your name. She will not profit from your death. I will not let her. The path forward became clear. It was not a path of violence. I would not sink to her level. It was a path of truth. She expected me to be dead. My survival was the one variable she hadn't factored into her cold-blooded equation. My very presence at that will reading would be a weapon. It would be the first blow. I turned back to Frankie. My resolve now absolute. I'm going to that meeting. Frankie stood up. Alarmit. Silas. That's insane. You can't walk in there alone. I won't be. Call me a taxi. Will you? A reputable one. I handed him the keys to my sedan. Lock this garage. Let no one near this car. No one. It's not just a vehicle anymore. Frankie. It's evidence. While Frankie made the call, I stepped into my office and dialed the number for the law firm of Davies and Finch. The receptionist put me through to the lawyer's personal secretary. This is Silas. Regarding the will reading for Martin, I need to speak to Mr. Davies directly. It is a matter of utmost urgency concerning the safety of the proceedings. The gravity in my tone must have worked. A moment later, a calm, baritone voice came on the line. "Mr. Davies speaking. Is everything all right?" Silas. "No, sire. It is not," I said, keeping my voice level and measured. "I have credible reason to believe that my personal safety is at risk from another beneficiary who will be present today. For that reason, I request that you arrange for discreet security to be present at your office." There was a pause. "That is a very serious allegation." Davies said carefully, "I am a very serious man." I replied, "There is one other thing. My son left a personal letter with his will. I must insist that you read it exactly as written, every single word, regardless of any objections that may be raised." Another longer pause. I could hear the gears turning in his legal mind. "Very well," he said finally. "I will see to it. We'll see you shortly." The taxi arrived minutes later. The ride into downtown Chicago was surreal. The world outside the window was mundane, ordinary. People were heading to work, grabbing coffee, living their lives, completely oblivious to the fact that I was on my way to confront my son's killer. The sterile glass and steel towers of the city reflected my own hardening expression. I was no longer a grieving father. I was no longer prey. I was a hunter. And the trap I was walking into was not for me, but for her. I analyzed her. Her arrogance was her greatest weakness. She believed she was smarter than everyone in the room. She would have an answer for everything, a lie for every truth. But she would not have an answer for my presence. She had planned for my absence. For a ghost. She was not prepared to face a man who knew her secret. In my mind's eye, I saw her there already, sitting in a plush leather chair, dressed in expensive morning clothes, flipping through a copy of some luxury magazine. She'd have a sad, brave smile practiced for the lawyer, a look of quiet dignity she'd rehearsed in the mirror. She would be waiting for the news of a tragic accident on the I-55. Ready to perform the final act of her gruesome play. The taxi pulled up in front of a formidable limestone building, with the law firm's name etched in brass above the heavy oak doors. This was it. I paid the driver. My hands steady. I adjusted my tie. Every step across the marble lobby felt deliberate, heavy with purpose. I pushed open the frosted glass door to the waiting area. And there she was. It was exactly as I had pictured. She sat in a high-backed chair, wearing a chic black dress. A copy of Vogue lying open in her lap. She looked up as I entered. A polite, melancholic smile already forming on her lips. Then her eyes met mine. The smile didn't just vanish, it froze, then shattered. The color drained from her face, leaving a pasty, sickly white. Her perfectly glossed lips parted in a silent gasp. The heavy magazine slipped from her fingers and fell to the plush Persian rug with a soft, muffled thud that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. For a full 5 seconds, the only sound in the opulent waiting room was the soft, final thud of the Vogue magazine hitting the Persian rug. The silence that followed was a living thing, thick and charged with an impossible reality. Helen remained frozen in her chair, her face a canvas of disbelief. The polite, melancholic mask she had so carefully constructed had not just slipped, it had been violently ripped away, revealing the raw, panicked animal beneath. Her knuckles were white where she gripped the arms of her chair, and her eyes, wide with a horror she couldn't conceal, darted from my face to the door, as if searching for an escape route from a nightmare she had just woken up in. Her carefully glossed lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish pulled from the water, gasping in an element it could no longer breathe. Finally, she found her voice, but it was a pathetic, strangled whisper, nothing like the confident, melodious tone she usually employed. "Silas, how are you here?" I took a slow, deliberate step into the room, letting the heavy oak door swing shut behind me with a soft, definitive click. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The quiet was my weapon. I met her terrified gaze and held it, letting her see the cold, hard knowledge in my own eyes. "I took a taxi," I said, my voice calm and even a stark contrast to the hurricane raging within me. "I imagine it was a much smoother ride than the one you had planned for me. Surprised to see me alive." "Helen." The directness of the blow made her flinch. She broke eye contact, her gaze skittering around the room, landing on anything but me. She attempted a laugh, but the sound that emerged was brittle and sharp, like ice cracking under pressure. "Don't be ridiculous." "Silas, I was just startled. That's all. I was expecting to meet you here." "Of course. But you just appeared." She fanned her face with a trembling hand. "A poor imitation of a woman recovering from a simple fright. You look pale. Are you feeling all right?" The audacity of her concern, the sheer, unmitigated gall of it, was breathtaking. She had meticulously planned my violent death not 12 hours ago, and now she was inquiring about my health. The rage inside me, a cold, dense star of fury, burned brighter. Before I could respond, the inner office door opened, and a tall, silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out. "Mr. Davies." He surveyed the scene with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to tension, his gaze flicking from my rigid posture to Helen's panicked state, to the magazine lying forlornly on the floor. "Silas." "Helen," he said, his voice a calm, authoritative baritone. "We're ready to begin. Please, come in." His intervention broke the spell. Helen seemed to seize the opportunity to reset, to rebuild her shattered composure. She stood up, smoothing down her black dress with hands that were not quite steady. She avoided looking at me as she walked past and into the lavish, wood-paneled office. As I followed, I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was recalibrating, constructing a new narrative. "He's bluffing. He suspects something, but he can't possibly know. He has no proof. I'm safe." Her arrogance was a fortress, and she was already retreating behind its walls. The office was exactly as I'd imagined, walls lined with leather-bound books, a massive mahogany desk, and a large window overlooking the bustling Chicago street below. The air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and money. It felt like a stage, and the final act of this tragedy was about to be performed. We sat in 2 plush leather chairs facing the desk. I could feel the heat of Helen's frantic energy radiating from the chair beside me. I, in contrast, became perfectly still, conserving every ounce of my own, focusing it toward a single point. "Mr. Davies sat down, put on a pair of reading glasses, and cleared his throat. "As you know, we are here to execute the last will and testament of Martin. This is, of course, a difficult and somber occasion." He gave Helen a brief, sympathetic glance. She responded with a small, sad smile, a masterpiece of counterfeit grief. She was back in character. He began to read. his voice a steady, dispassionate drone, reciting the dry, legalistic language of the will. He went through the initial articles, the payment of debts, the disposition of personal effects, small bequests to Martin's favorite charities. With every clause that passed without incident, I could feel Helen's confidence growing. The frantic tapping of her fingernail against her designer handbag slowed. She shifted in her seat, relaxing, a subtle smugness returning to the set of her jaw. She even dared to glance at me, a flicker of pity in her eyes, as if to say, "You poor, paranoid old man." She thought she had won. She thought the prize was just moments away. I let her believe it. I remained as still as stone, my gaze fixed on Mr. Davies, my heart beating a slow heavy rhythm in my chest. Patience, I told myself. An engineer waits for the precise moment to apply pressure. Finally, Davies arrived at the critical section. Article 4, Disposition of the Residuary Estate. He paused, looking over his glasses at both of us. "This clause concerns the entirety of the remaining estate," he said, his voice lending a new weight to the words, "including all shares in Martin's company, all real estate holdings, and all investment portfolios. The total value, as of this morning, is estimated at $40,250,000. Helen sat up straighter, a predatory gleam entering her eyes. This was it, the culmination of all her wicked work. She leaned forward slightly, an almost imperceptible movement, hungry for the words that would make her queen. "Mr. Davies continued, his voice clear and unwavering. "All the residue of my estate, I give, devise, and bequeath in its entirety to a single beneficiary." He paused again, turning a page. The rustle of the paper was deafening. Helen held her breath. "To my beloved father, Silas." The words landed in the silent room like a physical blow. Helen made a sound, a strangled, guttural noise, as if the air had been punched from her lungs. She jolted back in her chair, her face a mask of utter, uncomprehending shock. What she gasped, her voice cracking. "No, that's impossible. That's a mistake. The old will. We made a new one after we were married. He left everything to me." "Mr. Davies looked at her coolly. "This will was executed 2 months ago. Helen, it is the most recent, and therefore the legally binding, testament. There is no mistake." "But," why she stammered, her eyes wild. "It makes no sense. Perhaps this will clarify things," Davies said, his expression grim. He picked up a separate, sealed envelope. Martin also left a personal letter, with the explicit instruction that it be read aloud at this time. He broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Helen stared at it as if it were a venomous snake. As Davies began to read, I felt a profound wave of sorrow and love wash over me. It was my son's voice, reaching out one last time. "To whom it may concern, but most importantly, to my dad." Davies read, "If you are hearing this, it means my time ran out sooner than I'd hoped. I have spent the last few months of my life in a strange kind of fog, and a terrible suspicion has taken root, a suspicion that I cannot prove, but that I cannot ignore. Dad, if you are in this room, it means my greatest fear did not come to pass. Enver." Davy posed, his eyes finding mine for a fleeting second. "Dad, be careful with Helen. I love the woman I thought I married, but I have come to fear the woman she has become. Her interest in my health has felt less like concern and more like accounting. Her questions about my estate have been relentless. I fear she sees my life not as a partnership, but as a portfolio. I have changed my will to protect you, because I have a chilling certainty that if she were to inherit everything, your life would be in danger. She wants it all, and I don't believe she will let anyone, not even you, stand in her way. Please, be careful. I love you. Ardat. The moment Davies finished, the dam of Helen's sanity broke. "Please," she shrieked, leaping to her feet. The transformation was terrifying. The sophisticated, grieving widow was gone, replaced by a snarling, cornered animal. He was sick. The drugs made him paranoid. He didn't know what he was saying. "You." She whirled on me, her finger stabbing the air, her face contorted with hate. "You did this. You poisoned his mind against me. You manipulated him." She lunged across the space between us, her hands clawing for the will and the letter on the desk. A primal, desperate attempt to physically destroy the truth. But before she could take 2 steps, the office door swung open. 2 large, impassive men in simple black suits stepped inside. The security Mr. Davies had arranged. They intercepted her effortlessly, each taking an arm. She fought them, her expensive dress twisting, her voice rising to a hysterical scream. "Let go of me. You can't do this. That money is mine. I earned it. I suffered with him. It's mine." As they began to pull her, struggling and cursing, from the room, I stood up. I hadn't said a word since she'd started screaming. I waited until her wild eyes met mine one last time. "By the way, Helen," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yet it cut through her hysteria like a surgeon's scalpel. "The police will probably want to have a chat with you. Something about my car. They have some very good experts on staff." The fight went out of her. The color, the rage, the life it all drained away, leaving only a hollow shell of pure, abject terror. They dragged her out into the hallway, her final choked sob swallowed by the heavy slam of the office door. Silence. The room was suddenly, profoundly quiet. The only sound was the distant city traffic and the ticking of the clock. I stood there, my legs feeling unsteady, the adrenaline beginning to drain away, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its wake. "Mr." Davies slowly took off his glasses and looked at me. A new, profound respect in his eyes. He simply nodded. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I had been holding for 3 months. The first battle was over. The slam of the heavy oak door echoed in the suddenly cavernous office. A definitive, resounding period. At the end of a violent sentence, the silence Helen left in her wake was a different kind of quiet from the one that haunted my house. This was the stillness of an evacuated battlefield. The air, still tasting of gunpowder and adrenaline. I stood there, my legs feeling strangely weak, my body finally registering the immense strain of the last few hours. My hands, I noticed, were shaking again. "Mr." Davies slowly took off his reading glasses and polished them with a handkerchief, his movements deliberate, giving me a moment to collect myself. He hadn't just been a lawyer in that room, he had been an ally, a steadfast pillar of order in the face of chaos. "Well?" he said, his voice a calm rumble in the quiet room. "I believe that concludes the reading of the will." He looked at me. A deep, too, human understanding in his eyes that went far beyond legal counsel. Now, I believe we have a more pressing matter to attend to. My call to Detective Miller at the Chicago PD was a precaution. Now, it seems. It is a necessity. He's one of the best, a sharp, no-nonsense investigator. Are you ready to give your statement? I simply nodded, the exhaustion too deep for words. The transition from the opulent, old-world comfort of the law firm to the sterile, fluorescent-lit reality of a police precinct was jarring. The air here smelled of antiseptic, burnt coffee, and chaotic desperation. We were led to a small, featureless interview room, and a few minutes later, Detective Miller walked in. He was a man in his 50s, with a weary face that suggested he'd seen the worst of humanity and was no longer surprised by it. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and missed nothing. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He listened, his gaze unwavering. As I recounted the events of the morning, starting with Arthur's frantic warning and ending with Helen's explosive confession of motive in the lawyer's office, I spoke with the detached precision of an engineer, presenting a sequence of events, inputs, and outputs. I laid out the logic of the sabotage, the specific mechanical failures Frankie had identified. I told him about Martin's final, chilling text message. Through it all, he just nodded, taking notes in a small, worn-out book. He didn't interrupt. He didn't question. He just listened. It was one of the most profound signs of respect I had ever been given. When I was finished, he closed his notebook. Mr. Davies has already arranged for your vehicle to be transported to our forensics garage. We'll have a team go over it with a microscope. He said, You mentioned your neighbor. Arthur. Saw her. Does he have any security cameras? I'm not sure. I admitted. He's an elderly man. Fairly traditional. Everyone's got a Ring doorbell these days. Milagronde. A flicker of something, almost like optimism in his eyes. We'll check. Mr. Davies. We'll need a warrant for Helen's financial records. An inheritance of $40 million is a hell of a motive, but a mountain of debt makes it a certainty. The days that followed were a strange limbo. The outside world continued its relentless pace, but my life had narrowed to the four walls of my house and the periodic N2 to the nighty à la blanc. Grim updates from Detective Miller. The first call came 2 days later. We got lucky. Miller's voice crackled over the phone. Your neighbor Arthur doesn't have cameras, but the house across the street does. We got a warrant. The footage is grainy. It was dark. But at 11:32 p.m., the night before last, we have a clear recording of a woman matching Helen's height and build in a dark hoodie, walking briskly away from your driveway. It's not enough to convict, but it corroborates your neighbor's story to the minute. Each call was another nail. A week later, Miller called again. The financials came in. She's a disaster, drowning in over $200,000 of credit card debt, personal loans, and credit lines from luxury department stores. She was a month away from defaulting on everything. She wasn't just living beyond her means. She was living in a fantasy world built on credit, and the walls were about to come crashing down. The final call, the one that changed everything, came on a cold Tuesday afternoon. Miller's tone was different this time. Sober. Grave. Silas, he said, foregoing the formal title. I need you to sit down for this. I sank into the nearest armchair. Given the confirmed attempt on your life, and the extreme financial motive, We were able to get a court order to re-examine the coroner's report on your son. Martin. We had a toxicology panel run on the tissue samples they kept on file. He paused. Silas. His death wasn't from complications of his illness. He was being poisoned. Slowly. Methodically. Over a period of several months. The labs found significant levels of arsenic. The symptoms of his illness, the fatigue, the nausea, the neurological issues, they align perfectly with chronic arsenic poisoning. The phone felt impossibly heavy in my hand. The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. My son hadn't just died. He had been executed. His long, painful decline wasn't a tragedy of medicine, it was a carefully calibrated murder. Administered by the woman who kissed him goodnight. The woman who held his hand while she slowly stole his life. The grief I felt was no longer just for his loss, but for his suffering. A new, terrible kind of rage, cold and absolute, settled in my soul. The trial was a blur. I remember sitting in the cold, hard gallery bench, watching as the prosecutor laid out the case with methodical, brutal efficiency. The grainy video, the damning financial records, Frankie's expert testimony about the sabotage, and finally, the forensic toxicologist explaining, in chilling detail, how the poison had ravaged my son's body. I watched Helen in the defendant's box. The glamorous, confident woman was gone. In her place was a small, pale creature, stripped of her designer clothes and her arrogant smirk. She looked diminished, pathetic. When the jury foreman stood and read the verdict, guilty on all counts of first-degree murder and attempted murder, I felt no triumph. I felt no joy. I just felt the immense, crushing weight of justice finally settling into place. I closed my eyes and let out a single, shuddering breath as the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In the weeks that followed, the silence in my house began to change. The hostile, oppressive quiet of grief was slowly replaced by a calmer, more peaceful stillness. I had fulfilled my promise to Martin. The fight was over. One evening, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in his favorite armchair, the one by the window overlooking the garden. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The quiet was no longer an absence of him, but a space to remember him. The money, the $40 million that had cost my son his life, felt like a radioactive weight in my hands. It was blood money. I couldn't live on it, but I could transform it. Working with Mr. Davies. I spent the next 6 months establishing a foundation in my son's name, the Martin Fund. His legacy would not be a number in a bank account that a killer had coveted. His legacy would be action. We endowed 2 main branches, one that provided grants for promising new cybersecurity firms dedicated to protecting ordinary people, and another that funded a new, state-of-the-art oncology and research wing at the very hospital where he had been so meticulously poisoned. One afternoon, sitting in the small, simple office of the foundation, I took out Martin's letter from my wallet. It was worn and soft at the creases from being read so many times. I unfolded it one last time. I'm building shields. Dad, we stop the bad guys before they can even get in. A sad, gentle smile touched my lips. He had tried to build a shield for me, even at the end. Now, it was my turn to continue his work. A year after the trial, I stood in the back of a sunlit auditorium at the hospital's dedication ceremony for the new wing. I wasn't on the stage. I wasn't giving a speech. I was just another face in the crowd, watching as the hospital administrator spoke about the hope this new facility would bring to thousands of people. On the wall behind him, in clean, silver letters, was the name, the Martin Silas Wing for Cancer Research. I thought about Helen, locked away in a concrete cell. Her world shrunk to the size of her own greed. She had coveted a fortune, and in the end, it had brought her nothing but ruin. She had tried to erase my son, but in doing so, she had only ensured that his legacy would become something stronger, something purer, something that would outlive us all. My son had wanted to protect people. His life was a testament to that mission. Now, even in death, he still was. His spirit wasn't in the grave. And it wasn't just a memory in a grieving father's heart. It was in the hum of the servers his fund was helping to build, in the quiet hope within these new hospital walls, in the shields being built to protect countless others. The bad guys had gotten in once, but Martin's legacy was now a fortress, ensuring they wouldn't win again. His life and his light would shine on.